It is Tuesday, May 14th, and it's about 8:31. And welcome to week 2 of Introduction to Criminal Law. And I'm going to spend some time. I'm battling a cold, so forgive me. My voice sounds kind of raspy. Try not to cough into this thing, but pretty rough. Everybody in my house battling some kind of bug or something. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get through this. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I'm not going to go over all this information because I covered this in detail last week. I do remind you that your rubrics are located in each weekly assignment, and we're going to cover that. And then reminding you that our lectures from this point on will be on Tuesday nights, 8:30 to 9:30, or hopefully before that. And then making sure that you know that you needed to attend a live lecture or provide me the key word if you don't attend. I don't recommend students to just listen to the lecture just to get the key word, because there's some information that I cover, and I can tell sometimes by the written assignments when students don't pay attention to the earlier part when I talk about what the requirements of the assignment are. So we're going to go right into, we're not going to go over the welcome announcement again. We're going to go right into the announcement for the week. Module 2, Crimes Against Property, will be presented, and we'll cover that. I've provided to you already the PowerPoints for chapters 3, 4, and 12 of the textbook. And I recommended that you go through and look at the activities, which we will look at them during the course of this lecture. What are crimes against property, larceny, robbery, or burglary, misappropriation, trespassing, and vandalism. And then we're going to close out dealing with the key terms for practice, and then also the practice quiz as well. So your discussion assignment, the initial post is due tonight, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, on the issue of robbery, burglary, and theft. I'm going to talk about that tonight. And you know your initial post is due tonight, and your reply post is different from last week, will be due Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And you know what the requirements are that I expect in terms of discussion posts, and you know how I operate in terms of that. Finally, the written assignment, the identity theft problem. I'm going to go over the rubric. Remember, as I said last week, make sure you pay close attention to the rubric, because the rubric will give you the information that you need to help you maximize your points. Another thing that will help you maximize your points is getting in on time. And then finally, you know what this highlighted statement is about, because I shared that with you last week. So let's take a look quickly at the course calendar. Course calendar tells you where we are right here. Of course, if you click on it, it tells you your reading assignment, stuff that I already went over, your initial post, the lecture taking place, your reply post, and your written assignment that's due on the 19th, which is Sunday. Okay? And then the second one, check, is that the live classroom lecture, the keyword, that is due. So you got to make sure you get it in by Sunday to maximize your points, and you have to have the right one as well. Of course, your calendar, again, as I remind everybody, it's populated for the whole course. And then I repeat again that the course ends the 14th, which is 1 month from today. 1 month from today, but it'll be on a Friday, the 14th. And it doesn't end on the 15th. It doesn't end on the 16th. All assignments must be in. And it's in the module It's in my announcement, and you can see when I click on this what it says. It absolutely ends. So there's no confusion. No assignments will be accepted after that time. All right. Now let's get this out of the way here. Okay, close that. And let's go right to this week. Let's start out by going over the details of the assignments. As you can see, the discussion post talks about burglary, robbery, and theft, your initial post, and then your reply post. As I said before, try to reply to as many posts as you can. If you can provide citations, that's fine. Also, sources to help you is this guide to School of Justice Studies for Criminal Law. I pointed that out to you before, and if you click on that, it opens it up, and you can see about your weekly written assignments, your discussion posts, and it tells you everything you need to know with Grammarly, things that will help you succeed in this course. So you have that right there. So now let's get to the written assignment. Now, you'll notice this, that it is 2 parts. You must do both parts. You must do both parts. And it tells you this is a 2-part assignment. The first part involves dealing with this scenario, and then address the following questions in a minimum of 2 pages. That doesn't count the cover page, nor does it count the reference page. And you're going to go over these. And then you're going to create a flyer. Okay, don't copy and paste a flyer. Create a flyer of your own. And there is a template that you can use. If you click on that template, and I won't, it will help you. And there's some more information about that guide that will help you, and it tells you how to submit your assignment. So now let's go back and let's look at the rubric. Of course, you see the due date. Here is the rubric, so that there's no confusion, and it tells you what I will be expecting. It tells you the organization must meet the 2-page minimum requirement. You should make sure you run your papers through Grammarly, because I run every paper through Grammarly, not the discussion posts, but all your written assignments through Grammarly to see if they're original, see if you copied and pasted the material alone and you didn't put any critical thinking in there. And you'll lose points for that. Plus, I will have to report it to the school. And then your APA requirement. Notice it tells you about sources, never use Wikipedia, and it tells you about citations in the body and references at the end. And that's what you're going to need to do that. This is going to be pretty standard. Then part 2 tells you what you need to do, a 1-page minimum, a flyer. So you get 15 points for this. I have seen students do well here. They get 15, 20, they get 25 points. And then they get a 0 for this. And so they end up with 25 out of a possible 40 points. And it's pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward. But notice and pay attention to this, because this is how I'm going to grade your papers. Very, very, very important. I can't state that enough. So those are the assignments that are due. Let's go back. So you got your discussion posts, and then you have your written assignment. And that's what's needed. And then, of course, where we are now in the live lecture. So let's get now to the content of this, where I can be able to help you out. So these are the requirements for reading. I already shared that with you. So we're going to talk about What are the crimes against property? What is larceny? What is robbery or burglary, misappropriation? And we're going to deal with trespassing and vandalism. So what are crimes against property? Anything that's not related to crimes against a person, which we'll be talking about next week, is when you commit a crime and you do something to something that someone else owns. And some of the crimes listed are larceny. Larceny is commonly referred to in today's modern times as theft, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But there are various offenses that we're going to cover. We're going to cover burglary and robbery and those kinds of things. So let's look at each of these separately as we go through here. So larceny, as I already told you, it involves theft. So basically, the common law offense, taking personal property of another person with the intention to deprive them of that property permanently. That is, not to return it back to them. And as I said earlier, most statutes now refer to it as theft. Now, in many jurisdictions, theft can be a misdemeanor if it's a lower quantity. You see the lower value of the property. As you see in Florida, if it's $299.90 or less, it's a misdemeanor. I've already told you the definition of misdemeanor is where you can go to jail for less than a year and or fine. A felony is anything above that. But then if someone reaches that $300,000 amount, they may be convicted of what we call grand theft or felony. Now, that's going to vary according to jurisdictions because each jurisdiction writes their own code. And the criminal law has been codified into statutes. And Illinois has an Illinois criminal code, and it provides what are violations of the law in the state of Illinois, and all jurisdictions have their own, okay? And so you're going to find crimes like identity theft. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Retail theft, auto theft, theft of telecommunications. What is that? Well, that's illegally using something on the internet and taking that information, videos, satellite cable services. You know, there are people who will hook things up that they do without going through the proper organization or agencies. And so anyway, the point of the matter is the idea is to permanently deprive that individual of the property, and so as a result, that's when we start talking about larceny, now known as theft. Okay, so let's talk about a few of these types of examples. Vehicle theft, everybody knows what that is. That's pretty straightforward. And in jurisdictions, there are statutes that deal with specifically, and this is almost like standard, intentionally operating or driving without consent the vehicle of another. What is that basically? Stealing the car. You can see an example here of a person hot wiring a car, these kinds of things. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. What is joyriding? Joyriding, on the other hand, is something where the person takes it, but they don't intend to permanently keep the vehicle, but it's basically taking the vehicle to use it for something and then not return it at a proper period of time. If you, says here, if the vehicle is returned within 48 hours, then it could be a misdemeanor offense, not a felony. So if you take someone's car, and it happens a lot of times where cars are stolen and then they dump them. And if the person gets arrested, they might be charged with vehicle theft. But the point of the matter is that they are basically taking the vehicle without the person's consent. That's the key thing that all you got to remember is that. Carjacking is different. Carjacking is when it's taken by force or violence or threats, forcing a person to give up their vehicle and taking off with it. You're familiar with that. Illinois statute, which I'm very familiar with, prohibits a person from knowingly taking a motor vehicle from the person or the immediate presence of another by use of force or imminent use of force. So if a person, for example, has their car running and the person takes the car, then in that case, it could be considered as carjacking in the state of Illinois. And it's a felony in all states because of the value, number one, of the car. And it's not the same as robbery, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but it involves taking the car by force. Somebody say, well, it's robbery. Well, it has its own specific category, and it's a very serious offense. Notice Florida says, prohibits a person from intentionally taking a vehicle from the person or custody of another with intent to permanently deprive the person or owner of their property by force, violence, assault, or putting that person in fear. And those are the kinds of things that cases actually use to interpret what is carjacking, okay? So now let's move right on down here to what is burglary. Now, at common law, burglary involved breaking and entering the residence or property of another with intent to commit a crime or either steal property in the nighttime. That was the original statement for burglary under common law. And now, though, we've done away with that. It doesn't have to be a nighttime requirement. So notice what it says, that it can occur in a house now. It can occur in a vehicle, where somebody breaks into your car, steals stuff out of it, in your business, or any other kind of vessel, any time of the day. So the nighttime issue is gone. Now, breaking and entering in terms of burglary can be determined by very simply doing this. If I walk by your house and I break your window and reach in and grab something, I've committed burglary. Whether I physically, in my whole body in it, but my body enters it, or either an appendage of my body, like a stick or rod or anything, that is burglary. If the window is open, I'm giving a hint about something, the same issue occurs. And so the statute for burglary would definitely apply in a scenario, in a situation where that happens. So I'm just giving you some tips to help you out here. So burglary is defined as breaking and entering of the dwelling of another with intent to steal or commit another crime, such as vandalism or arson. Okay? And again, we did away with the nighttime requirement, so it can be 24/7 anytime. It could be a business now, and it is not just a residence now. All right? Now, there is something called home invasion, and home invasion involves something different from burglary. What involves with home invasion is a person has to be there and present in order to do that. And so burglary in itself does not require a person to be there in order to do it. Okay? So you should have that now. Now let's talk about robbery. Robbery is the unlawful taking, listen to the elements, of personal property of another with the intent to permanently deprive the person of the property, However, there's two other elements that are real critical. Must be taken from the person of an individual, and the taking must be done with the use of force, intimidation, threat, or violence. So, do you consider pickpocketing robbery, yes or no? Type in the chat box. Do you think pickpocketing is robbery? You're correct. It is not. Because one of the elements that's missing from pickpocketing is, look at it says. It says two elements. Taking from a person, which pickpocketing does, and, not or, with the use of force, intimidation, threat, or violence. None of those are present in pickpocketing. So pickpocketing would go back to theft. So robbery can be described, as I said earlier, as armed robbery, because you're going to use something to lead a person to believe that they have to give up something, such as this fellow down here. You see this picture, if you look at it. This person is holding a gun on this person. So this is a form of robbery. And it's armed because he has a weapon in his hand. All right? So now let's take a look at the next slide. Strong arm robbery. You see the difference here. Similar to bat robbery, except no weapon is used. But what has happened is that somebody snatches something off of you. So then, wait a minute. Isn't pickpocketing the same thing? No, because of the fact that in the scenario, the person has to be aware of that. Most pickpocketing that I know of means that the person wasn't aware that the person took the item. So look at what it says. A 25-year-old woman is jogging on a trail. She has a small purse in her right hand, and a 17-year-old runs up behind the jogger, wrestles it away, and takes off. So because no weapon was displayed, but force, remember, the earlier part is used, then the crime of strong arm robbery is occurring. So you see there's some force involved in that. Then the final one, look at that. Home invasion is another form of robbery in which, like burglary, but it's more serious because the threat of violence occurs. Similar to burglary, though, an offender enters the dwelling without the consent, but uses force to commit a robbery of the occupant. And so look what Florida says. In home invasion, robbery is intentionally entering the dwelling of another without consent and commits robbery. And so that meant the element of all of these elements are satisfied with force, threat, or intimidation. And then, so there you see. You can see clearly. All right? The one that tricks people is actually robbery because, for example, if a person sees a person taking something and they might be afraid and they see them, it's not going to fly. It's going to have to be from the person, and that person's going to have to be threatened, okay, intimidation or violence. All right. Misappropriation. Misappropriation is similar to theft, but what ends up taking place is that the person may be legally entitled to the property, but they convert it maybe to their own use, or either they misuse the property for their own personal gain. That's the key. Embezzlement, fraud, welfare fraud, we're going to go down and talk about those. So embezzlement. Embezzlement, for example, when a person unlawfully takes the item of money that a person has been entrusted with, like a person working in a bank, like a person working in a currency exchange, like a person that is an accountant or bookkeeper or something like that, and converts the money of the company to their own use. That is embezzlement. That's embezzlement. Fraud includes a variety of offenses: forgery, welfare fraud, when you apply for welfare and you lied on your application that you really are not in need of that welfare. Identity theft, where you've taken someone's identification, personal information, and converted it to use. I've been the victim of identity theft, most recently with a person where I used to live in a house. I had moved out in 2011, sold the house, and then I went this year to get a cell phone for my daughter with AT&T, and AT&T says you can't because you had one last year and didn't pay for it. And they had the address where I used to live, which I haven't used since 2011. And then I had to go through the steps of getting that straightened out. I finally did, but it created a problem. Identity theft can also adversely encumber your credit ability, where it shows up on your credit report. Fortunately, we had it off that cell phone deal with AT&T before it got that far. And then, of course, credit card fraud. We know what that is, where you're using someone else's credit card information. I've been the victim of that, where I went to a store, restaurant, and we find out later that you give the person who is the waiter or waitress your card. They're supposed to run it through and bring it back to you. Yeah, they'll do that, but then they have this guy had a little scammer in his pocket and ran it through that and would hook it up to a computer, and they would make a fake card. And I ended up $3,200. This was about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago it happened to me. But there's all kinds of things that can happen. That's why I tell people, when you get these offers in the mail and you get all these different things, you want to shred them or tear them up so badly. When I get a new credit card, I cut it up in so many small pieces that no one can use that. Now, there's supposed to be the chip that's supposed to protect you. Well, it hasn't been very successful in terms of that. But credit card fraud, so the bottom line is that what you're doing is you're taking the property of another for monetary gain for yourself through deceit, deception, or trickery. Theft by fraud of offenses can be a number of things, such as not paying a hotel bill, not paying a taxi cab or Uber ride. The Uber's kind of like gotten a hold on that because you usually pay it before, so they kind of figured that one out. Not paying for food received at a restaurant. People walk out and leave, that kind of thing. I can tell you another kind of fraud. Switching the tags in a store to get a lower price. I had a case one time years ago where a young lady was at a college town, and she was there, and her mom hired me to represent her at the college town in southern Illinois, and there was some young ladies she was with, and she wasn't aware that they were doing that, but they all got arrested. I got her off because I established clearly that she didn't know about it. But these young ladies were paying for the item, but it still wasn't the fair value of what the item was, and that's a form of fraud. Okay, so using someone's name or social security number to obtain a loan, or purchase a vehicle, then that is also another form of fraud. Forgery. Forgery is when you take maybe well, here's something. My wife and I get a joint check, and I sign the check, my name, and I sign her name and deposit it. It is not forgery. My wife signs my name on a check and deposits in our bank because it's not with intent to defraud me, or I'm not intending to defraud her. But if someone takes it and forges my signature and goes and cashes a check, then, or uses it to pay for something, then in that case, that is when they do that for financial gain or property gain. And so it's important that you understand that. Look at the statute. It says the taking, altering, endorsing of any instrument in such a manner that it purports to have been made, altered, or endorsed by the person. Writing a check for $10. If you write a check for $10 and someone puts an extra zero in there and 100, now that's why the words are supposed to be written on there. It's kind of hard to put 10 and turn that into 100 if you write that properly. And so those kinds of things involve fraud, such as here's a Kansas forgery statute applied to a case in which a person who was an opioid addict stole a prescription pad from the doctor's office and forged the doctor's signature and presented the prescription to a pharmacist to obtain medication, and those kinds of things. The bottom line is that you are not the person that is it is alleged in the document or that is provided in the document, and you're using it for personal gain. I already talked about welfare fraud, any kind of energy assistance, food assistance, food stamps, or any of those kind of things, where the person actually decreases or lies about their income. And it tells you when you sign these documents that you can be guilty of committing a felony. And identity theft, I've already kind of talked about that, so I won't go through that in detail, but there are so many ways. And then one of the things that you can do to protect yourself from identity theft is what I do. I constantly check my accounts. I check them quite frequently, my bank account. I check my credit card statements. I use my apps on my phone to check all of this stuff on a regular basis. I check my bank account about 3 or 4 times a day. And I have found things that have happened on there. I've had charges on my card through my bank, my debit card, that weren't supposed to be on there, or double charges and things of that nature. And so, you know, the Federal Trade Commission will submit various ways. I was solicited a few months ago by someone who, what they did was they hacked into the Rasmussen employee email and sent me an email inviting me to participate in this mystery shopper thing. And when they invited me to get into it, you know, I didn't know. I responded back to the person to see if that was the real person. Well, I would find out later, when I finally reached the real person later, that they weren't aware that their name was being used. So anyway, what ended up happening is that the persons who were involved in that started calling me, and then they eventually sent me some information that asked me to take they sent me a check for like $1,800 and told me to go take this check, put in my bank account, and then go to Walmart and buy some gift cards, and then give them the numbers on it. Well, I already knew it was a scheme all the way, so I reported it to the postal inspectors and provided a form. But the Federal Trade Commission constantly provides details that we can utilize. Keep law enforcement abreast of things that happen as well. So identity theft is such a significant problem that some law enforcement officers are considered as mandatory reporters. For example, in the state of Wisconsin, it requires when individuals report to a law enforcement agency within their jurisdiction that they have become the victim of identity theft, the agency prepares a report on the violation itself. So the point of the matter is to protect others as well. And so it's a huge thing. And now since we have the internet, I mean, there's all kinds of fraud thing. I get, I'm sure some of you have even gotten them, fake emails telling me I was the recipient of so much money and please send my email information in. Tell you get $100,000, send in $100 cashier's check, and they will send it to you. No. And then now you get a lot of these robocalls and phone calls. I've gotten several calls recently telling me that I was going to be arrested and that I owe the IRS money. IRS doesn't call; they send mail to you. So you get these calls. I was looking at Facebook recently where one of the law enforcement agencies was playing a game with the person, and they were leading them on, and the person was telling them telling the law enforcement officer who was at the police department when he did this, that you know, the person was telling them that you're going to be arrested by the local law enforcement authorities. And so anyway, the person led them on all the way until they got to the end, and they says, so what if I don't send the money? They says, your local police department will arrest you. He said, I am the local police department. Click. And the person hung up. Sometimes people says, you know, or you can trace those calls, but you know what kind of phones they use. They use and this is what the guy was using that was communicating with me about this so-called secret shopper thing, is that they get these phones and they pay, you know, money for them, and then they use them. Well, you can't trace them because you don't have to provide identity, ID, or none of those kind of things to get it. So there's all kind of things out here that you have to be careful. And then with credit card fraud, protecting your PIN information and things of that nature. So you have that. So now let's move on to trespassing. What is trespassing? Trespassing is very simply entering the property of another without the consent. Now, it can be in a home, it could be a business, it could be, as they say, a vehicle, or aircraft, or watercraft. But generally, there is a sign that will say, for example, if it's land, prominently saying it's private property, trespassers will be prosecuted. And some states that says just make being on the land of another without the consent of the person trespassing. But generally, there is some notice that the person receives. So look at the example they give in this scenario here. If an intoxicated person walking home becomes confused and enters the residence of another, falls asleep on the couch, the unintentional act is trespassing. In contrast, the intoxicated person didn't commit burglary because there was no intent to steal or commit property. So, so the key thing is that a person that enters the property of another restricted area, whether they know it or not, can be guilty of trespassing. And you won't run across that a whole lot in law enforcement. Vandalism is just doing damage to somebody's property. That's basically what it is. And we use pretty much criminal damage to property in most jurisdictions, and where a person intentionally damages the property without consent. And that's pretty much what we run into when we start talking about vandalism. It says it's not uncommon for our property to get damaged any given day. So we might accidentally drop our smartphone or get in an accident, or intentionally damage the property of another. The end result is property damage that could result in a criminal violation. The key thing is that when something is accidentally damaged, it's not criminal violation. And it's a civil matter and not a criminal matter. But if there is an intentional damage of it, then in that case, then it becomes a criminal act. And that's it as far as damage, involving property. Now, there are some key terms that I always share that you can use to study. Again, going through this, you pull out the flashcards, and then you can do this. I'm going to allow this so you'll see it. So let me move this out of the way. Move this up. Let me move this right here. Let's see where. Oops. I have hit a new window. I don't want to do that. I didn't want to do that either. Let me go back. Oops. Okay, let me go back and go into my, here we go. This is what I wanted to show you. So anyway, this tells, move this out the way. All right, come on, Richard. There's a way to move this. I'm hitting it. Here we go. Okay, not working well. But anyway, what is involved is, okay, I'll just move it down. Oops, I hit that again. Yeah, this is not working well. Okay, okay, there we go. Okay. So the unlawful taking of property of another by the use or threat or use of dangerous weapon or any article used or fashioned in any manner and lead the person to reasonably believe that is a dangerous weapon. So you flip that over and you'll find the answer, armed robbery. Excuse me. And then you can go to the next one. And you're given the unlawful use of force, threatened use of force or fear directed at an automobile operator which compelled them to give up their vehicle. What is that? What is that? What do we call that? Type it if you know it. We talked about it. What is it? Here's the answer. There it is right there. Carjacking. And you go through. And all of these help you prepare also for the exams. All right? So let's go back to, okay, here we go. All right, so we can close that. And we should be able to get back to where I want to be. Here we go. So we come back down here. And then we have the next thing, practice. And then this is, again, a scenario where you have some information given to you, and you start the activity, and you have a scenario. A 17-year-old boy walking home from high school. He's approached by two suspects. The suspect shove him to the ground and take his wallet. What type of crime is this? Is it theft? Is it armed robbery? Is it burglary? Or is it strong arm robbery? Which one is it? Which one is it? Okay. Answer. Let's see. You said that. Let's try and see. And you are right. It is. So that's how you do it. You go through, so a 14-year-old left her bicycle outside on the front lawn. This is a tricky one. I remember this one. In the morning, the bicycle is missing, and the family reports the crime to police. What type of crime is this? Okay. Some get tricked into doing this. Let's see. You're right. Some people think it's burglary, but it is not. You're absolutely correct. Good deal. Good. So now you're getting the hang of these things. Last one I'm going to do. And then there's more. There's 9. A 25-year-old man is attending a party inside his friend's house. While inside, the man breaks into a locked room and steals jewelry. The crime is discovered the next day, and the victim reports it to police. What type of crime is this? Is it armed robbery? Is it burglary? Is it strong arm robbery? Or is it theft? Which one is it? Yeah, take a shot. You say theft? Okay. How about trying this one? It's burglary. Remember, the man didn't have permission to be inside that locked bedroom. Follow that? You got to make sure you use all the facts. So that's why they threw that into a locked bedroom. Okay? Now, on the other hand, if the man was attending a party and the person didn't break into a locked room but took some jewelry there, then in that case, then it would be theft. Okay? All right. Let me see what you said. Oh, okay. Yeah, but you remember here, see, here's the deal. Yeah, he did it. He was attending the party there. He's an invited guest. But was he invited into the locked bedroom? Was that an area that he wasn't supposed to go to? Okay, all right, there we go. So you have to be careful about those things. So anyway, so you do all of those on your own, and then we go back. So let's go down to the last thing, and the last thing that we have here. And these are nice because they help you out. So the quiz, by all means, do the practice quiz. But the practice quiz is really, really pretty cool, and it's going to pop up here in a second. So let's start with the quiz. And this is what it's going to look like when you take the test. The unlawful entry into the dwelling of another without consent with the intent to commit a robbery is known as what? Okay? I'm not using that. I'm going to use this one, and you'll see why. Because the robbery, remember the elements of robbery? Okay? Burglary is not, doesn't have to be there. Home invasions are robberies that involve the violence or threat of violence. So the unlawful entry into dwelling without consent with intent to commit a robbery. Remember, they're committing a robbery. The elements of robbery had to be satisfied. So that's how you got tricked on that one. What crime is committed when someone points a weapon at another person while on a sidewalk and demands that person to turn over personal property such as a wallet? Is that armed robbery? Okay, let's see. Yep, very good. Some people would have picked strong arm robbery, but remember it's different. It says armed robbery is the unlawful taking of property of another by the use or threat of force and use the dangerous weapon. As soon as they give that pointing the weapon at you, because that put them in fear. Very good, excellent. So that's how those things work. So you have to really focus on uh, making sure that you follow these things all the way out. Let me put you, making you a little big there. Let's move you back up here. And then we come down again. I think that's it. Yep. So you got the practice quiz, and you got uh, that. So any questions about anything concerning that? Any questions? All right. So it's pretty clear what we're talking about here. So the only last thing I'm going to say before we adjourn is the key phrase: identity theft. That's it. You get that to me, and you get the point. All right. So I thank you for attending today, Crystal, and uh, appreciate you spending the time. And I look forward to seeing you and some more next Tuesday at the same time, 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And as I said, reported, we will be through by or before 9:30 in on these weeks. So I'm going to say good night. And again, if you have any issues or concerns or questions about any of these assignments, you go back and listen to the lecture or hit me up, and I'll go tell you, listen to the lecture, because I think I made it pretty clear what the expectations are for the discussion post, and definitely for the one written assignment that you have for the week, which you know, involving identity theft. Okay? So I'm going to say good night. See you next week. Thank you. Good night.